Good evening and welcome to the virtual tour of the Cultural Expressions exhibition at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We now welcome Carol Seal Council, Chairman of the Eastern Area of the Links Incorporated's Arts Facet.
Good evening and welcome to Washington, D.C. Our Eastern Area Program Chair, Anna Maria Bishop Harris, is a bit under the weather this evening. She had a very minor accident on Monday, so she has asked me to welcome you on her behalf. So I'd like to bring you some remarks from Anna Maria Bishop Harris. First of all, she'd like you to know that a mighty team has been working since this past summer to produce this event, which we know you will enjoy, and it will be a cultural enrichment and enjoyment for you this evening. She would like to thank the museum staff, especially Dr. Cynthia Carter and her entire International Trends Committee. She'd also like to thank our brilliant tech and communication teams who work tirelessly to bring events like this to life. We couldn't do it without you. And finally, she wants me to tell you that we have a very special guest this evening. In terms of the Links Incorporated, 13 has been a very lucky number. So please sit back, relax, sip some special sweet tea, and nibble on some delectable red beans and rice as you enjoy the tour. Now, without further ado, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce our esteemed Eastern Area Director, Dr. Shawana Tucker-Sims.
Thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate that warm introduction, and good evening to our Link members and guests. I'm Shawana Tucker-Sims, the Eastern Area Director of the Links Incorporated, and on behalf of the officers, leadership team, and over 4,600 members of the Eastern Area, I am pleased to welcome you to the virtual Cultural Expressions Tour located at the National Museum for African American History and Culture. This is the latest in our virtual museum tours in cities that have Links chapters and museums dedicated to African American life or culture, or featuring exhibitions of art or artists of the Black diaspora. I would like to personally acknowledge our International Trends and Services Facet chairs, Dr. Cynthia Jacobs Carter and Dr. Constance Moss, who worked with our program chairs, Anna Maria Bishop Harris and Nakina Glenn, to conceptualize this evening. This is a collaborative effort inclusive of our other facets, Dr. Crystal Davis, Services to Youth, Carol Seal Council, and Valerie Cooper, the Arts. When our organization was founded 75 years ago, one of its core tenets was to promote and sustain the people and culture of Black Americans and those of the African diaspora. Our founders also recognized that one of the most important ways to learn about and appreciate a community was through exposure to its artistic expressions. I wish to acknowledge that our students in Liberia at our partner schools, Monrovia College and AME University, that have joined us this evening to explore not only this collection, but to be exposed to the museum and what it has to offer. Special thanks to all of the experts leading us in this exploration of art this evening, but especially Dr. Joanne Hippolyte, curator of the African diaspora at the museum, and again, Dr. Cynthia Jacobs Carter. Thank you for helping us to embrace the legacy of who we are and where we came from, while cultivating a future for ourselves and generations to come. At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing one of our visionary leaders who is passionate about supporting and promoting works within the African diaspora. She has forged a 30-year career in helping others to better themselves by developing policies and programs for advancement through her professional career. A dedicated servant leader, She has been recognized by numerous organizations for her work. She maintains board leadership with the Black Women's Agenda and the Association of African American Life and History. She is an active member of the Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C., and to us is known as Number 13. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our 13th National President of the Links Incorporated, Dr. Gladys Gary Vaughn.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker Sims, for that kind introduction. And thanks to the Eastern Area Links for inviting me to share this arts and history experience with you this evening. In Ecclesiastes 11:1, you will find these words: "Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days." The museum is the result of the vision of Civil War veterans, Black Civil War veterans, those who believed in the bread that they would cast so many years ago. And we are the joyful beneficiaries of the bread that they cast. That bread has become the National Museum of African American History and Culture, one of the nation's, indeed perhaps the world's, greatest treasures. Take me, for example. I was privileged to attend the February 2012 groundbreaking ceremony for the museum. I attended some of the events in the week-long opening celebration in September 2016, and subsequently I have visited the museum many, many, many times to view exhibitions, to attend meetings and conferences, book talks, and the like. I have learned so much. I have seen so much, and I still have not gotten to all of the floors of the museum and all of the exhibits. I was also privileged to be solicited by a now dear deceased sister, Margaret Turner, who was a museum administrator, and her friend, Link Alma Hobbs, to join a part of a legacy group of contributors to the museum. And I was present when Link Margaret accepted the initial contribution of the Links Foundation $1 million grant. And I was present at the annual Asala Black History Month luncheon in February 2019, when Lake Margaret accepted the final payment of the Omega Psi Phi $1 million gift, where Secretary Lonnie Bunch was the keynoter. So like many of you, the National Museum of African American History and Culture is buried deep in my soul. It is a place that tells the whole story of Blacks in America. It tells the truth. The museum brings new meaning to lift every voice and sing. You are in for a treat tonight. You are in for a special short video presentation, a curator talk, and an opportunity to ask questions and receive answers. I am pleased that the Eastern area has elected to work with the museum to feature this particular exhibition, Cultural Expressions. To those of you who have joined us, I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you so very much. And now back to you, my sister.
Thank you so much. We are just delighted that you took time to join us and speak with us and be with us. And we honor you and thank you again for being here tonight. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Crystal Davis, who is the Services to Youth Chair of the Eastern Area. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Carol. I am honored to welcome our students from Monrovia College, which serves 9th through 12th grade with over 900 students enrolled, and AME University with over 5,000 students enrolled. This is a very special evening. We are excited that you are here with us virtually to take part in the museum tour. It is my esteemed honor to congratulate and introduce Dr. Constance Moss, our International Trends and Services Co-Chair. She has been appointed as our official liaison for AME University and Monrovia College. Dr. Moss.
Thank you, Link Crystal. It is certainly a pleasure to offer greetings to President Toom and President Atta. President Toom is the administrator at Monrovia College, and President Atta is the chief administrator at AME University. We are so delighted to have them enjoy this virtual tour of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We are also thrilled to engage students from each institution in this fantastic Smithsonian Museum tour. At this point on the agenda, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Dr. Cynthia Jacobs Carter. Link Cynthia is the chair of the Eastern Area's International Trends and Services facet. Link Cynthia is a member of Old Dominion, Virginia chapter. She is employed by the Smithsonian at the National Museum of African American History and Culture as the Senior Advancement Officer and Director of Harriet Tubman Legacy Society. She is an author of many books and is dedicated to serving the community at large. Dear Link sisters, it is with great joy to bring to you Link Cynthia. Link Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Link Connie. My dear friend and co-chair, I could not be happier than I am right now to invite everyone to our home at the Smithsonian. Our home is your home because just as you've heard, this is our museum and we are the ones who get to enjoy it and to bring our family, our young people to learn all about who we are and where we've been, so we will know where we are going. And I might add that my great-grandfather was a Civil War veteran. He is one who went to, I can't say that he went to Washington to advocate for this museum. I cannot say that, but Solomon Jacobs did go to Texas, to Galveston, to spread the word, indeed, that our people were free. So this is a double meaning for this museum in my heart. So thank you again for joining us. And I would like to bring to you our very special curator, my friend, my colleague, Dr. Joanne Hippolyte. She's Haitian born, and she is the supervisory museum curator of the African diaspora at the Museum of African American History and Culture. She's the board president of Museums Association of the Caribbean, and her interests include carrying out her great expertise that lie in the African American and the Afro-Caribbean material and expressive culture. She is very well known and very well respected at the museum, and she has many publications And I believe that once you listen tonight, you'll see a whole new dimension of the museum thanks to her. So without further ado, let me introduce in our wonderful home, Dr. Joanne Hippolyte.
Greetings, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight, particularly with all of you around the world, those of you who are local, those of you near and far. I want to thank the Links for their generous invitation to present one of my favorite topics, the Cultural Expressions exhibition that I curated for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In order to give you the best experience of what that exhibition is like, whether you've been here or not, we have a short, little less than 4-minute video that takes you into that space. So I'm going to ask our tech person to play that right now, and then I'll come back on screen and talk about the exhibition.
Black cotton. Black cotton.
I couldn't help but notice your pain. My pain runs deep. Share it with me.
Black cotton. Speak. Black cotton.
Here's my honesty, my work undressed, legs stretched across piano, traded like cattle, raped like animal, left for dead, sucked dry for inspiration, and love with the idea of living long enough to simply write about it, push it out my body and watch my son slowly grow into it. You said you want a poem. Now what you gonna do with it?
Akbar, Allah Akbar.
Israel was in Egypt's land.
You keep on keeping me, I wanna say thank you, Lord. Yeah, yeah.
You're muted.
Apologies. That's like the most common thing you hear on Zoom calls, right? You're muted, you've forgotten to turn your microphone on. So I'm back with you all today. I hope you enjoyed that experience. It's the closest you're gonna come to actually experience being in the Cultural Expressions Gallery without actually stepping foot in it in Washington, DC on the 4th floor of the museum. It captures the sights and the sounds and the flavor and the colors of the exhibition, and I think a really important way. And I wanted to make sure that we were able to share that with you today as well. So I'm going to talk to you about what it took to get that exhibition up and what are some of the components. I'll be giving you some highlights of the different sections in the exhibition itself. And there'll be time at the end for you to ask me questions as well. So I encourage you to put questions into the Q&A and let me know what you're interested in knowing more about in terms of the Cultural Expressions exhibition. So as my colleague, Cynthia, said, I'm the supervisory museum curator of the African diaspora. I've been with the museum since 2014, so I got to be here when we were opening the museum in 2016. I am a specialist in African American and Afro-Caribbean material and expressive culture. I get that history and that background from having studied African American and Caribbean studies as part of my graduate work, as part of my life and lived experiences as a Black person of color in this country and from the Haitian diaspora as well. And because I worked in Miami for quite a long time, and when I was doing research on Black cultures in Miami, they were always cultures of the Black diaspora. So before I start talking about cultural expressions, I actually want you all to wish my museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, happy birthday, because we are celebrating our 5th anniversary year and all of the wonderful things that have happened since we opened 5 years ago. As you can see, opening day was September 24th, 2016, and a lot has been accomplished since then. We've already seen 7.5 million visitors in the museum. That's a historic number. Online, 15.4 people have visited us to see what we have to say about African American history and culture. We've had hosted 250 public programs in our space. It's something we're actively looking forward to getting back to when the COVID constraints are over. We've had 700 special events at our museum alone. We're a high venue for rentals. We've had 17 temporary exhibitions, and temporary exhibitions are those exhibitions that come only for a short amount of time. They may be up in our galleries for 6 months or for 8 months or for a year, but then they go away and another one replaces them. On top of that, we have our 13 inaugural and founding exhibitions, which are permanent exhibitions. So they will be up for 10 years and more. And Cultural Expressions is one of them. We also have collected over 41,000 images and objects since the museum began collecting in 2010. That's a lot to celebrate. So I'm very proud of what the museum has been doing. To celebrate our 5th anniversary, we're having a number of events and programs that we're releasing throughout the year. One very special one was the Reckoning, Protest, Defiance, Resistance exhibition, which is now on display in our Visual Arts Gallery on the 4th floor. It does look at the intersection of social justice and art, and is a response to the events of last year, particularly with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We have a second exhibition that just opened just a few weeks ago as well on the bottom floor of the museum, the concourse level, called Make Good the Promises. It's about Reconstruction and its contemporary legacies today. Just a few weeks ago, we held our Race and Fashion Symposium. The museum has a large fashion collection, and we wanted to talk about what African American designers have had to do to make it in the mainstream world of American fashion. That virtual symposium, all of it was completely recorded, so you can go back to our events page and click the box and you'll be able to see all of the talks that were held during that one-day symposium. Just today, we launched our virtual searchable museum initiative. This is the most advanced digital technological undertaking the museum has ever taken on. And it's one of the things that will allow visitors, even if they're not here, to be able to experience our exhibitions in as fully as they can within from the virtual space. The first exhibition that's on display in the virtual Searchable Museum is our Slavery and Freedom exhibition. So I encourage you to go to the museum's website and check it out. And lastly, lastly for this live, but not lastly for what the museum is doing for its 5th anniversary, we also released our Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap just a couple of months ago as well. But we're here to talk about cultural expressions. Let me tell you a few things about this gallery, which you can see fully pictured here on the screen. Cultural Expressions is located on the 4th floor of the museum, and the 4th floor is where all the cultural galleries are. It's actually the first gallery that visitors enter when they come on the 4th floor, whether they're coming up from the escalator or they're exiting the elevator. So in order to get to the other galleries, you have to go through Cultural Expressions. And so the other galleries on this floor are over here in the black area. Here is our Taking the Stage exhibition, which looks at African Americans in the performing arts. And every place where you see African Americans on the stage, whether that's Broadway, on the comedy stage, in television, in movies, it's a great retrospective of their presence in that venue. And then this little red spot right here, that is Chuck Berry's Cadillac, right? In our Musical Crossroads exhibition. Musical Crossroads looks at all of the genres, American genres of music that African Americans have contributed to, and in some cases created. And then over here, it's not very easy to see, but that's the entrance to our visual arts exhibition, which is now featuring the Reckoning show. The Cultural Expressions exhibition is a 5,000 square feet space, and it's divided into 5 thematic sections, which are these wall cases right here that are standing up. It's a circular space, and it's a circular space because culture, we believe, is very circular. It circulates among people through generations, from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren, between different groups over time. It continues on with us. So the designers took this idea of this culture circulating literally and decided to create a circular space for the exhibition. So I'm going to share with you a design secret of Cultural Expressions, which most people don't learn unless they're taking a tour with me. And that's that the other design secret of the exhibition is that it's based on an African-American quilt, the one that you see on the right here. As you can see, there are these squares, right? The designers decided that they were going to use rectilinear cases, right? That were modeled off of African-American quilts to create to hold all of the artifacts and the images in the exhibition itself. So it has that sort of rectangular patchwork kind of look to it. And also it has all these different colors as well that you would see on vibrant African-American quilts. Each section is its own color. So what are cultural expressions? Well, culture is defined as the customs, the beliefs, and the arts of a particular society, a group, a place, or a time. And expressions of culture are those visible acts through which culture is encoded or presented. And there are many, many, many types of cultural expressions. The exhibition only looks at 5 of them, but there's a great variety of them. The 5 thematic sessions, those wall cases that I was talking about, are divided into these 5 arrangements: foodways, culture and cuisine; language, the power of the word; artistry, craftsmanship and creativity; style, image and identity; and movement, social dance and gesture. And I've placed this guidebook here, which some of you may be familiar with if you saw the movie The Green Book, or may have heard before about the Negro Motorist Green Book, which was a guide that African Americans used to travel through the South so they could find safe places to eat, to get gas, to go to the bathroom when they were on the road. One of the things we thought about when we were thinking about the thematic sections, like of all the cultural expressions that could be used, what should we focus on? We thought about guidebooks, right? What would be a great guidebook into African American culture? If you were traveling, right, into a different country, as many of you probably have done, what are the kind of things that you would see in an experience? Well, you would definitely probably taste food that was different from the type of food that you had at home. You would hear sounds that were different because people may speak a different language from you. You would definitely experience artistry. You may see that through some of the tourist craft or by going into the museums and seeing examples of the history of the art in the region, or by visiting a craftsman shop and looking at their wares that are, these are things that are unique to that particular region or that particular people. You would definitely notice different stylistics, right? Different ideas about what beauty and what clothing people want to wear, how people feel about their identity. Sometimes you may see that in the form of traditional dress that would be different from something you've known about before. And movement. If you went to a club or you went to a performance in that country, you would definitely notice that they have a particular style of dance. They definitely have their own music as well. The ways that they gesture to each other can be different from each other. So these are sort of common things that you would find and want to explore or notice if you went into another culture. And we thought this would be a great way to introduce our broad public to African-American culture. Curators always have to figure out what are the educational messages they want to give to the visitors as part of their experience. So it's not just a matter of putting up a whole bunch of different things. We have to think, what is it we want people to learn? What is it we want them to take away? What is it we want them to know? So the key educational points for the Cultural Expressions exhibition are that visitors will understand that African-American and African diaspora cultures are not monolithic, right? We're not all the same. We don't all share the same cultural traits. We are not all from the same place. And because of that, there are regional variations with us. And across over time, our cultures change as well. Culture also circulates between groups and evolves over time. So it doesn't stay stagnant. The way that we may have cooked greens during the South before the Civil War is very different from probably the way that urban people in the North maybe create greens today, for instance. Culture has served as an inspiration for other new and innovative expressions of cultural production. And then cultural forms are rooted in historical conditions. So a historical condition is something like, I am an African person who's been transported to the New World as part of the transatlantic slave trade. My historical condition is that of being a person who is enslaved in this new place and trying to understand it, trying to make a new home, trying to make a new world for myself here under certain conditions. Or you may be a woman in 1920, 1925 who's brilliant. You know, you could be an engineer if it was 100 years later. But at that moment in time, women aren't allowed to go to study those fields, aren't encouraged. So your historical condition as a woman limits what you're able to do. But cultures are also sources of sustenance. We rely on them. Gospel music is a great example of that. There are creative acts of culture which we use to sustain us and bolster us in difficult times. There are 3 iconic objects in the Cultural Expressions exhibition which communicate those educational messages. One of them is a bottle tree. And if some of you have ever seen a bottle tree, I'd love for you to tell me in the chat if you've seen one before and where you've seen one. It's there to represent the fact that Africans were not a blank slate when they arrived here in the New World, in the United States in particular. They brought with them their beliefs and their traditions, and they continued them. Bottle trees were used in the Congo area of Africa. People believed in that region that empty bottles could capture bad spirits. And Africans and African Americans brought that belief along with them and practiced that in the American South. So you could see bottle trees, particularly in the 18th and the 19th century in certain parts of the South. And then that belief also got transmitted to other people because culture circulates, right? So Southern white people also began to use bottle trees. This is a modern rendition of a bottle tree. It's beautiful and it's right there when you enter into the gallery. The quilt is a great example of the educational message of culture circulating between groups. Because quilting is not a textile technique that we knew Africans practiced. There were many other types of technical textile practices in Africa, but quilting was not one of them. It's an art and a practice and a trade learned by Southern Black women, largely by other Euro-American women who were, teaching them how to create these quilts during the periods of slavery to create these quilts for their own families. So African American took this tradition and this practice, and they made it their own. They created these vibrant colors, these new these new patterns that had never been heard of before. They've sort of made it their own. So it's there, this quilt is there, it's a large object, and it's there to represent the fact that culture is something that we also learn from other people, grow in contact with, and make it our own. And then the third iconic object is this Oluwe of Ise post. Oluwe of Ise is the master wood carver in the Nigeria region of the continent of Africa prior to 1938. He was known for these intricate wood carvings. This one is of a priest on a horse. And he was also known for putting these tripartite crowns on top of the his veranda posts, so it would hold up a veranda. And that was used to hold up the a balcony or an area within a person's home. So our wonderful designer, David Adjaye, wanted to riff off of the idea of all of this wonderful work that Oluwe of Ise has done. And he thought nothing would be better than to create the museum's design after this man's wonderful work. So as you can see from the shape of the design of the museum here, it's actually based on this work by Oluwe of Ise. Now, the museum leadership loved this idea because they wanted the building to embody ideas of progress and uplift and moving forward. As you can see in this design here, this is one of the inspirations as well. So they went forward with this design. There were many different design options, but this is the one that they selected. And as a result, one of the key educational messages, again, is that new things are created from culture. And our museum, I feel, is an example of something new and something wonderful that's been created from a past tradition and expression. So when you enter cultural expressions, you're going to see the foodways, culture, and cuisine section. And I'm just going to mention very quickly, because I know our time is limited, that one of the ways that I wanted to get the educational message that, you know, Black people are not a monolith, they're not all the same, was creating as much variety as possible in the different thematic sections. And the way I got that across was by looking at 3 different types of recipes in 3 different regions of the country. So we looked at red beans and rice in the New Orleans region. We talked about the fact that this is a diasporic food. You know, the beans likely came from Haiti. The rice is, you know, the knowledge and skills brought from the West Africans. The spices have Spanish and French influences. And this comes together to create the cuisine we know as New Orleans and Louisiana cuisine. We talked about greens. Right? We know that every group in every country in the world has their own way of making greens. They have their own way of growing their own types of greens. But when Africans arrived here in the New World, they encountered the types of greens that Native Americans had experienced growing. They took those greens, they innovated on them, and they added ham hocks and other types of meat flavorings in them to spread the protein resources that they had available to them. And they created this unique cuisine that we now know as greens. But again, thinking about diversity and things not being monolithic and things not staying the same, we collected a pot that's down here from the Florida Avenue Grill in Washington, D.C. And they bill themselves as the oldest soul food restaurant in the world. And their greens pot, they make Afro-vegan greens. So they don't make them using the traditional ham hocks. And I wanted to make sure that we told stories like this, again, to get away from the fact that not every culture doesn't always stay the same. It changes and it continues as it changes. And then we told the story of oysters, which is something that most people don't connect with African Americans. They think about it as fine dining and expensive food, but really African Americans were involved with with oysters from sea to table, as they say. They were on the oceans, tonging it, harvesting it, bringing it in. They were selling it on the streets in the 18th and 19th century throughout the United States. They were working in the factories, as you can see in the photographs here, opening up the cans and putting them into the canned goods. They were restaurant owners, as these 3 gentlemen here represent in the exhibition. So 3 very different cuisines, not all the same. It's not all soul food. We have a section called Language, the Power of the Word. And the way that we also wanted to tell the story of diversity in here was by not focusing on any one particular language, because Black people, of course, speak very differently depending on where they live in the United States, who their parents were and where their parents came from, what educational level they might have, what kind of settings they existed in. And there are many different types of language forms practiced within the African American community as well. So the way we got that across is we brought examples of Gullah Geechee language in. We talked about the great debaters in the early HBCUs in the 1920s and the 1930s who helped prove that if they use, mainstream American English and argue really well, they help defeat stereotypes of inferiority about Black people throughout the American South. We talked about radio DJs and the way they can, communicate to their audiences and bring a feeling of home by using the linguistics and stylistics of particularly urban and Southern language. We talked about preachers, right? Because we know they have their own stylistics as well, oral stylistics that we know derive from the way Africans value language and use language. And we talk about civic leaders as well who use language for liberation theology. Artistry, craftsmanship, and creativity. Here we are working on the idea that there's no distinction really between artistry, between fine arts and craftsmanship in African American culture. Often we focus on fine artists, right? The ones who do the lovely paintings and the ceramics, but we forget about the people like Philip Simmons here at the top right, the craftsmen who are every day beautifying the American landscape. Philip Simmons was a blacksmith located in Charleston, South Carolina. When he first started practicing the trade, he was taught by other black blacksmiths as well. He was doing things like candlesticks and horse-drawn carriage wagons. That eventually went away, and he started moving on to decorative arts and creating all of these wonderful gates and balcony grills, the kind of things you would see in Charleston and New Orleans. He's responsible for over 500 pieces that you see as you walk around Charleston, South Carolina. So he's really creating a sense of place through his trade, through his craft, and helping to beautify the landscape. And what we wanted to do is get away from this division of the idea that there is fine art and then there is craft. The two are the same and are functional for and are very important in African American culture. The artist you see here at the bottom is Kermit Oliver. He is a fine artist out of Texas Southern University, works largely on biblical themes in his work. He's the only American designer to have been selected to create some of Hermès's beautiful scarves. They continue to hire him as well. So he's a noted fine arts designer. Style, image, and identity. Before I talked about historical conditions, right? That there are historical conditions that sometimes show up in our cultural expressions. And one of the ones we talk about here is the issue of colorism, actually. That colorism is an issue that's a problem within the United States. Why is it a problem? It's because beauty standards in the United States were built by around a white standard, a white European standard, which saw things like big lips and larger noses and hair that's curly as negative and portrayed it as negative. And of course, African Americans could not live up to the standard. And they didn't control the media for the 18th and the 19th century and well into the 20th century as well. So they couldn't fight back against these images, which were basically saying that African features and Black features were ugly. So colorism emerged as a result of that. And colorism is, of course, looking at lighter skin, straighter hair, all of those aspects as a way of valuing certain Black people as better than others. We talked about the effects of that, the problems that created within the community. But then we also talk about the change that started happening in the 1960s, here captured by Elizabeth Catlett's Black is Beautiful print here, and the way African Americans started talking back to this idea of what is beautiful and changing beauty standards in America in the 1960s with the Black is Beautiful movement, and how that has continued even on, though we still today, even now, struggle with colorism. One of the fun sections in the exhibition is called gesture. I'll just talk about gesture in particular. And it's also something that's mitigated by historical conditions. Gestures are non-verbal communication, ways in which we want to show something that we mean without having to say anything. And one of the fun things about the gesture section for us as curators was that it's fun. It was fun because we got to create categories of what these gestures meant, because there just wasn't a lot of research actually about what these gestures were and what they meant, written scholarly research. So the curators got to have a lot of fun looking up as many gestures as we knew existed, dividing them into categories like gestures of worship, gestures of protest, gestures of acknowledgement, and finding pictures of them as much as we possibly could. And then we knew that we were going to open ourselves up to criticism, and we welcome that. We wanted people to tell us if we got it right. Is there another gesture we should speak to? And people have been great so far about doing that. So things like the hands up, don't shoot gesture that came out surrounding the Michael Brown murder made it into the gallery. Of course, the Black Power fist, giving dap, which was invented in Vietnam by Black soldiers there. The fist bump heard around the world with Michelle and Barack Obama. So this is just a fun section of the exhibition that we enjoyed creating. And it's a lot of the gestures, as you can see, are created in times of protest and or when people need solace. So they're conditioned by history. And then lastly, the last section that I'll mention in the exhibition is the African Diaspora Ring. So I talked about these cases here. These are the wall cases that have artistry and foodways and style. But there's also a set of floor cases that look at these same themes in the African diaspora. We wanted to make sure we reflected on the fact that we have share these powerful connections with other African descendants around the world. It may look their food may look a little different, but there are similarities. There are some stories that we share. There's some language stylistics that we share. The Smithsonian has a huge number of international visitors, and we wanted to make sure that they thought about the Black communities within their own countries as well, and reflected on these ideas when they went home. So in the African diaspora section, you will see panels and artifacts related to social dance in Cuba, Senegalese foodways, language in Haiti, colorism in Mexico, and style in Jamaica, for instance. Oh, and that is the end of my presentation. I hope I haven't taken too much of your time. 7:47, not too bad at all. But I want to make sure we have time for questions, and you can feel free to ask me anything that you like.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hippolyte. That was just amazing. I have not been to the museum yet, and I can't wait to get down there. Thank you so much again. I'm sure everybody on this webinar has enjoyed your wonderful presentation as much as I have. I'd now like to introduce my co-chair on the Eastern Area Arts Facet. She is also our museum liaison in private life. She's a corporate art consultant and a fine art appraiser, the wonderful Valerie Cooper. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Carol. And wow, Dr. Hippolyte, I am just completely blown away with that brief tour, but very powerful, very magical, very explosive tour. And I've been to the museum and I've been on that floor, and you just can't get enough. You just can't get enough. So I am looking at the questions in the chat. There are several, and I have to say that we will not get to them all, but I'll do my best to get through as many as possible. The first has to do with you describing the layout of the cultural expressions design and the 5 thematic sections. And by the way, I just so appreciated the talk about the circular sort of rationale, as well as the design being based on an African-American quilt. So one of the persons in our audience is interested in knowing more about the actual quilter. Is it a quilter from the South, I think you mentioned, that is currently living, and where can we see more of his or her work in your museum or perhaps in SAM? And I'll let you respond to that.
Absolutely. Well, we have a pretty large quilt collection at our museum that you can find just by going to our website and clicking explore the collection and put in the word quilt. And all of the ones that we have will show up. This particular quilt that was on display when we opened the museum, since then a new one has replaced it. We don't know who made it. And that's so often the case, unfortunately, with African-American history and culture. We have thousands of photographs in our museum that we can't identify all the people who are in the photograph, right? It's and we rely on scholars and visitors to tell us as much as they can if they know anything. We do our own research as well. We do know that it was made by an African-American woman quilter. We acquired that particular quilt from a collector, an African-American woman quilt scholar who had spent years collecting information and material culture. And we also know that it's all made from pieces of men's suiting, which is pretty interesting. This quilter obviously had access to scraps, maybe at a factory that she worked at, right, of men's suits, and she pieced those pieces together, pieced that particular quilt together.
Thank you for that response. And yeah, the quilters, I think, are just so incredibly creative, using materials that are available, using, things from everyday walks of life. And we so appreciate all the effort that they have put in over the years with the different symbolisms and letters. And we know that, speaking of Harriet Tubman, those quilts were used to give signals, to give direction, to get people who were traveling the Underground Railroad from point A to point B very safely. So the next question actually has to do with, several of us have the image of Harriet behind us, and want you to talk a little bit about what this piece of art is actually depicting. I understand that you were very involved in acquiring it for the museum. Wondering if it was a commission or did you find it already created? Tell us a little bit about the artist and what the meaning of this beautiful piece is all about.
Yeah, I'm very proud to have brought this item into the museum. It's a work of art by the great quilt artist, Bisa Butler, who's getting so much attention all over the world right now for her amazing artistry. And she's someone who's she went to Howard University. She's, half African-American. Her father's from Ghana and her mother's from the United States, and African-American from the United States. She brings both of those traditions together into her artistry. So she takes West African textiles and fabrics and she weaves them into these portraits of people. And the portraits are based on historical photographs. So this is an actual photograph of Harriet Tubman that we have in our collection. We call it colloquially Young Harriet because it's the youngest photograph of Harriet Tubman that's ever been found. It was discovered a couple of years ago. It went up on auction. Our museum was lucky enough to be able to collect it in collaboration with the Library of Congress. So we joint own this picture. We asked Bisa Butler to go through our photographic collection based on women and activism because we really wanted something related to those themes. And she chose this image, and the amazing things that she did with, you have to come and see it in person in the visual arts exhibition. It doesn't do it justice, but the sunflowers in the back here, the intentionality behind the fabrics that's been selected, which was designed by women of the Congo. There's such a rich story and history behind this piece. It's on display right opposite from the Amy Sherald portrait of Breonna Taylor. So the two of them are in conversation with each other about social justice and history and the place of women right now.
Wow, and one could have just imagined what the conversations between those two works of art must be like, given all the things that are happening in the world and that have happened with respect to Black women. So thank you for that. The next question has to do with your first theme, foodways, culture, and cuisine. You talked about that red rice being a NOLA staple, and I think Cynthia put a very nice recipe in the invitation, so hopefully some will have a chance to make that. We heard you talk about greens and all the different variations, and I remember eating my first dish of kalaloo. Being from the South, we had the greens with the ham hocks, but when I visited friends that were from Jamaica and other places from the Caribbean, they had kalaloo, and as of late, there's a Brazilian version with garlic where the greens are actually cooked in a wok. So, greens have certainly camouflaged to many, many different things across different cultures, as well as oysters. You talked about the oysters, and so many of us have had family members who made a living shucking the oysters. And who remembers the little rule that you can think of to determine when the oysters are in season? In the South, it was always the months with the letter R. So starting with September through April, which meant the summer months, you kind of don't want to eat oysters, right? But is that really true or not? Well, it's a rule we lived by. Given that the museum also has thematic restaurants on the first floor, the question is there a relationship between foodways and the different foods that you had to curate align with, do those themes align at all with the restaurant themes? Because I know Low Country may be a theme. So talk about the relationships between the two, if any.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much, a strong connection between the foodway section and what's going on in the cafe. The two talk to each other in really interesting ways. What I mentioned before about diversity, we weren't going to focus on any one particular regional food. We weren't going to say all Black food is Southern food, and that's what that cafe gets away from as well. When you enter our cafe, you're offered different regions to eat from. You're offered the agricultural South, right? You're offered the Northern states, you're offered the Western Range, and you're offered the coast, the agricultural coast, which is where the whole New Orleans, the Atlantic coast. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of it, but where the New Orleans region's food comes from. So you're able to eat all the different styles of cuisine that Black people have helped create in this country. One of the things we wanted to make very clear is that the Black hand was in everybody's kitchen, everybody's. They were in the Northern states in homes cooking for wealthy white families. They were in Southern plantations. They were on chuck wagons, creating and innovating on Western cuisine. One of my favorite cookbooks in the Cultural Expressions Gallery is one called Choice Recipes from the best caterers and cateresses of the state. And it's by the Negro Federation of Clubs. So it's in Montana. These people in Montana, now Black people have never been more than 1% of Montana, but they had enough of them to create a cookbook in the 1920s of all their best recipes. And when you look inside that cookbook, you see staples like greens and fried chicken and other recipes, but you also see things like tamale pie and other Western influences, capturing that sense of regionality and African Americans being involved in all types of cuisine as well.
Wow, amazing. And my mouth is sitting here watering, listening to you describe all those wonderful foods. We have time for just another 2 questions, and I'm going to make these about you. I know that you're an author of wonderful books. Holidays are coming up. Would like to know if there are 1 or 2 titles that you would recommend for our students, and several of them are, I believe, on tonight. And just want to hear what you have to say about what you think we should buy for our students for the upcoming holidays.
Oh, sure. Well, okay. So I am an author of middle grade novels for 8 to 12-year-olds. So my second book, Ola Shakes It Up, is about African-American girl who moves into a predominantly white neighborhood with her family in the 1990s. And what I was interested in doing with that book was updating what was happening in the 1960s, right? As Black desegregation happened and Black people were able to move into white neighborhoods. What were their experiences like? I wanted to talk about what happens in the 1990s. And it tends to be more popular than any of my other books. Today, I'm writing a new book, which I hope will be on the market soon, which is actually set in 1959 in Miami, and it's about the story of a friendship between a white girl and a Black girl who were both young adults during that period of time, and what that experience would have been like for them at the peak of the civil rights movement. There are a plethora of wonderful children's books out there that you could pick from. It's hard for me to even choose one right now. Some of my favorite authors are definitely, Edwidge Danticat, who writes for the Haitian diaspora, but she also writes wonderful children's books as well. So I highly recommend that, and anything by Virginia Hamilton, who's way back in the day, but helped capture some of the wonderful folk tales of African-American life and culture.
And your legacy, when it's all over, said and done, and your season at the museum has come to an end, what does Dr. Joanne Hypolite want to be remembered for?
So I want to be remembered for making sure that we provided diverse representations of Blackness at our museum. Because it's just too easy. When we were doing the Cultural Expressions exhibition, it's just too easy to stick people into these boxes, right? Black people only eat soul food. They only talk urban slang. There are these stereotypes that exist about the culture, and they don't see Blackness in all of its full diversity and all of its international diversity in the United States. in all of its richness. And I want to make sure we never forget on staff that that's not what we're about, that we are supposed to be showing the plethora of experiences, breaking up these ideas of monolithic treatments, and really sort of encouraging people to embrace that about themselves, that we can be unified as a people and have our differences while still celebrating all of our rich diversity.
Excellent. And thank you so much. Our time is up. I'm going to turn it back over to our host to close us out. Thank you again, Joanne.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you, Valerie and Dr. Hippolyte. I can just personally say I will remember you for this wonderful presentation tonight, for opening our eyes to a whole different viewpoint at the museum. Again, I haven't been, and I should have been down there years ago, but I will be there shortly and I'll look for you. So we thank you. We thank you for joining us. I'd also like to thank everybody who's on this call tonight. We are, as I opened with, in Washington, D.C. tonight, but I'd like you to join us 2 weeks from now on December 5th, when the Eastern Area Links go to the Great White Way. We'll be on Broadway in New York City on December 5th at 3 o'clock, and we'd like you to join us. We will be featuring LaShans, who is the star of a new play that is opening tonight, Trouble in Mind. Trouble in Mind was written and opened to wonderful reviews off Broadway in 1955. 66 years it took to transition from off Broadway to Broadway. It's opening tonight. It was a play about both the civil rights and the feminist movements. So I leave you to wonder, why did it take 66 years?
Exactly.
But our own Anna Marie Bishop Harris will interview LaShans, and we will have exclusive pieces and vignettes from the Broadway production. And again, it will be a wonderful webinar that the Eastern Area Links will present. Thank you again to Dr. Cynthia Carter and her staff, and I turn it over to you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you so very much, my dear sister. I would just like to wrap up by saluting our dear Link Anna Maria, because this was her brainchild. This was her thought that we would pull this together, and with everyone's help, along with, of course, those you have met, and dear Dr. Constance Moss, everyone has had a hand in this, and everything from technology to graphics, everyone has done a stellar job. And we at the museum live for this. We want to welcome you all so that you can learn more, be more, do more, based on the things that our people have done throughout the years. And most of all, let me thank again, Dr. Joanne. You have brought us into the museum. I could see it, I could feel it. I just felt like I was back home at the museum, and I'm glad that together we could welcome everyone to our home. So without further ado, I'll just say, be on the lookout. We'll have certain programs happening related to Monrovia, related to the United Nations Association and International Women's Month. So you'll learn more about what we're doing, and please be safe, be well, know how much we love you and we have enjoyed this time with you. Thank you and good night.